Lovely. Thanks, Tim. Emma said she wasn't keen on, she hadn't got used to seeing a picture of herself on the screen. I hate it, so I'm going to very quickly scarper behind my presentation. So, what I'm going to do over the next 10 minutes is just tell you a little bit more about the program that I'm now doing. You've got this. And then a little bit about why nature and the work of the Nature Partnership is integral to our vision. And then in particular, focus on how we're using insight and learning to understand more about access to our natural and open spaces and inform our work going forward. So, quickly about You've Got This. Tim's already given a bit of an introduction on this one. So it's a 6-year programme to help the most inactive become more active through a population level change in physical activity. It's one of 12 pilots across England, all of which are funded by Sport England. And it uses a whole system approach. I'm going to talk a bit more about that, something I'll talk about in a moment. But we're also using approaches of distributed leadership. We recognise that leadership isn't something that's at the top of organisations. It's right the way through our organisations and our communities. And also how we promote more of a collaborative rather than a competitive approach to achieving outcomes. And it's very much about the how, not just the what. Which means we have a strong focus, as I'll talk about a little bit later on, with insight and learning. So first of all, just something on physical activity. These are national figures on the number of people, percentage of people, adults, that achieve the government's target of 150 plus minutes a week of physical activity. You notice that about a quarter of people don't manage that at all. But that's not just across the piece. So if you look at socioeconomics, you're far more likely to be inactive if you're long-term unemployed or never worked or in a routine occupation rather than in a more senior position. Now, that's no accident, no coincidence. That's linked to some of what the other speakers have been talking about things like access, quality green space, and opportunities in some of our communities. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So, what are our programme priorities? They're in two forms. The first is the communities of interest that we're interested in. These are communities that are not geographically defined, but where physical activity can help improve a condition. So we're talking about, for example, people becoming more active before they have major operations, which can improve their outcomes, people with or at risk of type 2 diabetes, and people who are using commercial weight loss services. So they're some of our target groups, along with health professionals and supporting them to see physical activity more as part of a patient's and that's around 4 wards clustered together on the Redcar, Cleveland, Middlesbrough border. And of course, these two groups are not exclusive. So there are people from the communities of interest living in the geographical communities. So what are we talking about when we say a whole system approach? Well, traditionally, we tend to think about dealing with things at an individual level. So there's an individual, we tend to say, well, if you want to be more physically active, you could go out for a run, you could go out for a walk, all these kinds of things. But actually, the behaviours that impact on an individual's ability to respond to something like that are complex. They're based around the social environment, their friends, their family, their social networks, the organising institutions that they're part of, such as schools and healthcare facilities, the physical environment, and that's something that's really important, isn't it, when we're thinking about the natural environment, and around all that policy, the laws, the rules and regulations that set the overall framework in which we operate. And I say it's all very interesting, Mark. You might be at the wrong conference. This is about nature. So, take a look at this. So this is how that actually transcribes into a fairly simple system map around physical activity. So the programme that I'm involved with is looking to improve total physical activity at population level. Let's start to look at how that's impacted by things around it. The availability and quality of public open space, and when we talk about quality, we're talking about diversity and accessibility. not having shortcut grass and beds of petunias, how we design our urban spaces, and some of the other speakers have already talked a bit about that, about accessibility, which just brings us on to things like, can you get there easily? But then into the more complex issues, and Shard has touched on some of these in her opening introduction. So, does a space give you a fear of crime? Is there a sense of antisocial behaviour? Are people motivated to go to a space? And that could be motivation through things that Emma's talked about, being on a green social prescribing programme, volunteering, or just enjoying the fact they can see nature if they go for a walk. The whole cultural issues, and Maya talked a lot about the cultural issues that impact on people's ability to enjoy nature, and they also apply to physical activity. And then right on the edge there, things like air quality. And of course, nature has a massive part to play in giving us a good air quality and allowing people to enjoy things, in that way. So, what I'm going to move on to now is, if we're going to look at that complex system, is about how we actually gather information and use information. This is for the rest of my talk, to help us get a better understanding of people's needs and how we might work with them to co-design interventions or actions. And the first one I'm going to talk about is social listening, or artificial intelligence. And that's a form of social listening that uses linguistics to draw out information from things like Twitter and Facebook and all these other forms of social media to give a better meaning about what people are saying. Now, we're using it as a snapshot at the moment to inform both the marketing communication of the programme that we're doing, but also at a time when you can't meet people face to face. It's about how we can actually start to develop activities. So here's a simple example. So this is the number of times that phrases related to green or outdoor spaces appeared in Twitter feeds. As you can see, the start of the lockdown, as indeed we've talked about earlier, suddenly local green spaces become really important to our communities. And just look how it rises up at the start of the first lockdown and doesn't actually drop back off to pre-lockdown levels by the end. That's great, but you don't actually know what people are saying. They're just using the phrases. What you can do with social listening and artificial intelligence is you can start to actually work out whether things that people are saying are positive, they're neutral, or they're negative. So here's some around green space. And if you look up in the top right there, what you'll notice is actually most people's comments were fairly neutral. But what's quite exciting is the number that were positive about green spaces was way, way higher than those that were negative. And yet often we think, when people talk about green spaces, we're talking about antisocial behaviour, we're talking about crime. Yet during that period of the lockdown, people were being really positive about the green spaces around them. But it does also allow you to pick out some of the issues and the why behind the numbers. So, for example, if we look at barriers to cycling and barriers to walking, two of which ways people would have been accessing green space during lockdown, there's some things in there on the cycling side that you'd expect. Is there a good infrastructure? Am I going to get my bike stolen? But there's things that perhaps we wouldn't normally think about. Can I get my bike fixed? Oh, yeah. And driver and pedestrian aggression. And on the other side, walking and running, yes, we know about littering and things like that, but also people were very concerned about whether other people were going to practice social distancing. And just for a bit of balance, they were also worried about cyclists on the footpath. We can also use social listening to run campaigns. So this is a joint campaign developed with the Nature Partnership during the lockdown around Love Your Local Landmarks. So encouraging people to go out for a walk or a cycle ride, take photos and post them afterwards. And we can also use it for very specific issues. So, for example, these are comments from women on social media, which are now informing a campaign that we're looking to develop at the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office that talks about how safe women feel and how able they feel to go outside to exercise in our green spaces. The second thing I want to talk about very briefly, because I know I'm running out of time, is around storytelling and how we use storytelling. Now, storytelling is a holistic and qualitative way that allows people to express how they feel without having kind of formal surveys and the like. They can be written narratives. A lot of what we're doing are video interviews, but I didn't have the courage to try and put a video clip in my presentation. Photographs, diaries, all sorts of things, and allows people to participate in any way that they want. And we've used that in the programme to work with our community partners to develop an outdoor offer for young people, which is based on insight about how people felt that green spaces weren't as well used or weren't used for the right reasons, and particularly local green spaces weren't getting used. And through that, we developed an offer both in Middlesbrough, led by Middlesbrough Environment City with MVDA, and one in Redcar between Kids Connect and the North York Moors National Park, to develop a programme of activity that included families being able to visit sites like Nature's World, but also getting children and young people out cycling to green spaces, which is better, they say, according to the storytelling, than going on a bus, and also allows them to do it themselves again and again, as well as promoting active travel and health and well-being. And similarly, a project with Outwood Academy, and this one illustrates the based on the insight that we had from the school about developing activities to engage children who don't learn well in the usual ways in the classroom-based environment, and also about how we're using that learning to enable the academy to share it with other academies within their trust. So, to close then, before I get Tim's wrath for going over, these are just some closing thoughts. So a system-wide approach gives us wider connectivity, and Emma's touched on that with the green social prescribing and new opportunity. We use such as sentiment analysis and the storytelling of valuable insights to complement other forms of data collection. Not only do they be useful for data collection, but they also support our learning and evaluation, which allows us to improve and evolve further. And they're valuable in developing social media and other campaigns, which in this case we're promoting nature and our outdoor environments. And it isn't just this programme that's collecting it. Most of us on this conference today will collect that information in some form. The challenge is how we pool it together and interpret it for maximum impact. And finally, and within reason, the insight that we've collected is there for others. So it's there to be shared with other people if you want to do something different in your organisation. It's also there to develop partnership working and has already been used to help inform a number of funding bids moving forward. That's it. I'll hand you back to Tim, who's going to lead on the panel session.